Hey, good morning. How is everyone this morning? I think it's a Tuesday morning. And, the other day, a couple days ago, I was thinking about the things I wanted to talk about this week and asking the Lord what kind of message He wanted to give or wanted me to give for Him. And I wasn't getting anything, so I just went about my morning. And then as I was going upstairs to do something, He gave me that. Don't make your family your enemy. And I was really taken by that because I wasn't thinking anything along those lines. And it was so strange that, he gave me that thought. So I thought, well, I should look in the Bible and see what the Lord has to say about family. Because in John chapter 13, I believe it is, verse 34, he says that he was giving a new commandment, that we love one another as he has loved us. Now, when he said, love one another as I have loved you, he was speaking to the apostles at the time. But that doesn't mean that he wasn't saying that for future generations. And we are future generations. So I'm pretty sure he wanted us to know that we should love one another as he loves us. And that's pretty profound. I mean, that goes towards not making your family the enemy, but to love them wholly and completely. And I've got quite a few verses that he showed me along these lines. And I'm just going to have to keep referring to my notes because I don't remember all of them. But in Proverbs 6, chapter 6, verse 20, I believe. Yes, he says, my son, keep your father's command and do not forsake the law of your mother. Bind them continually upon your heart, tie them around your neck. So he wants all of us, particularly we who have parents, so we're children, we're all children to someone. He wants us to keep our father's commands and do not forsake the law of your mother. So there he's asking us to be a unit, to be a family unit. He spoke of family and love a lot in the Bible. So obviously that's really important to him. And it should be easy to love because he first loved us. So we start with our love for Jesus, but then we have to move it down into the family unit. We have to remember that this was Jesus' plan, God's plan when he created man, was to live in harmony with one another. I know in today's world, I mean, Satan is really, really trying hard to create division and disruption in families. And I was thinking about that. I was thinking there seems to be a lot of that today. But when you look back through history, even back to the early days of the Bible, there was family disharmony. It started with Cain and Abel. Cain killed Abel, his own brother. And that's where it all began. So I guess when I was thinking about that, I realized that it's not so much that it's new or it's more than ever before, but now we have 24-hour news feed, and they're always telling us how we're not getting along. There's shows on television that promote stories of families harming one another. So it's not so much that this hasn't always gone on. It's just that we hear about it more frequently today than in the past. You only knew about it if you lived in or near where the family disharmony was happening. And that brings up an interesting point in that this goes back how many years? More than 2000, because the Bible started 2000, 4,000 years before Jesus came. I can't remember. So that's a lot of years. And in all those years, and all those centuries, and all those generations, we still haven't gotten the message that God gave us, that Jesus gave us, to love one another as he has loved us. I wonder when we're going to get that. I wonder why we don't get that. Why can't we just simply accept everyone for where they're at? And I know that the Lord gave me that message. Do not make your family the enemy, because I'm guilty of it as much as the next person. And I've been trying to change my ways, but I keep slipping back into it every now and then. Every now and then, almost daily, let's face it. I do. And why? Why? You know, most of us can be so kind and understanding and patient with strangers. Why can't we learn to do that with our family? In let's go to Ephesians. Ephesians is pretty interesting. Ephesians chapter 6, it tells us in verse 1, children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and your mother, which is the first commandment with promise. Now, isn't that interesting? He tells us that to obey our mother and father is the first commandment with promise. And what is that promise? That it may be well with you and you may live long on the earth. And then it tells us, and you fathers, do not provoke your children to wrath, but bring them up in the training and admonition of the Lord. So not only does he want families to get along, but he wants the leader of the house, the father, the leader of the family, to bring those children up in knowledge of the Lord. And you know, a lot of the disharmony today throughout the world is a result of those teachings being lessened, made of no account. You know, like they've taken that out of the schools. They've taken so much that, you know, they're making it bad to talk about God, to teach about God, to teach how much Jesus loved us, how much God loved us. God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son. That's a pretty big give, if you ask me. And yet, still, we have this disharmony and discord within so many families. It's so great when you can see a family, at least seemingly, does not have discord, that loves one another despite their differences. Because let's face it, as many people can fill a room is as many differences of opinion you'll have. It's rare that two people think alike. So that's no different in families. Children grow up and they get opinions and they get thoughts and ideas of their own. And why shouldn't they? Because they're teaching the next generation. But our fundamental belief should be and desire should be to love one another, especially our family. Stop making them the enemy. In chapter 5 of Ephesians, I just saw this because I highlighted it not too long ago, and it may or may not apply, but let's read it. Therefore, be imitators of God as dear children, and walk in love, as Christ also has loved us and given himself for us, an offering and a sacrifice to God for a sweet smelling aroma. So when we love one another, that's a very sweet thing to God. He enjoys it very, very much. Um, there's so many verses in the Bible that talk of love and how we should love one another. Let me just see what I've got here in Matthew. Again, chapter 4 of chapter 15, verse 4. It says, "For God commanded, saying, honor your father and your mother, and he who curses father or mother, let him be put to death." Wow, that is pretty brutal, pretty strong. If he's saying that you don't honor your father and your mother, you should be put to death, that's showing that he's putting a lot of importance into the idea of loving your mother and father, of loving one another, coming together. And in 1 Corinthians, let's go there. 1 Corinthians. I know it's here somewhere. Yeah, here we go. 1 Corinthians chapter 13. He gives us an example of what love is. In chapter 13, verses 4 through 8. Love suffers long and is kind. Love does not envy. Love does not parade itself, is not puffed up, does not behave rudely, does not seek its own, is not provoked, thinks no evil, does not rejoice in iniquity, but rejoices in the truth, bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never fails. Love never fails. When you take the time to remember that you love your family, just thinking that thought when you're angry with them, or when you're upset with them, or you think they've done you some wrong, just thinking that thought alone can change the atmosphere, can change your atmosphere, can change your spirit. And that is your spirit calling out to you to remind you your family is not the enemy. So stop making family the enemy. Love them. Love them. Love one another as he has loved us. Simple message. And one that I needed to hear, one that I needed to give attention to and thought to. And I'm glad he gave me that. And I hope in sharing it, I've done what it was he wanted with this message. And that is for us to think on these things, think about family, and remember why you love them. Parents, remember when that child that is making you want to pull your hair out, remember that moment that you first met them and you looked in their face and they were beautiful and you loved them. I remember when my daughter was born, I had her by cesarean section because I was such a puss about getting cut. I wanted to be out, so they put me out. And so I came to in recovery, and the nurse said, "Here's your daughter, Emily." And she held her up to me. And I remember looking at her, and I remember the overwhelming flood of love I felt for this little being. She had these great big eyes that were just staring at me. And I instantly fell in love. Instantly. And that love has never died. That love has never gone away. And it never will. And if we could all just remember that moment when we first met our children, our grandchildren. My grandson was a beautiful baby, as was my daughter. It is different though, when you meet your grandchildren for the first time. You do love them. I mean, there's no doubt about it. But I did not find it as overwhelming, as all consuming as I did when I met my daughter. Why do we forget those things? Why do we forget that we love them beyond reason? And yet, even with all of that, we do not love our children as much as God loves them, as much as He loves us. We should find it so easy to love one another when we focus on the love Jesus has for us. I mean, think of the greatest love you have in your life and then multiply that to infinity. And that's how much God loves us. He created us. He created us for relationship. He created us for his joy. And so we owe it to God and we owe it to ourselves to remember that faith, hope, and love, and the greatest of these is love. The Bible tells us that love is the greatest. So love. Love one another, but more importantly, love your family. Do not make them your enemy. And that's my message for today. We'll see what he gives me for the next time. Because at this point, I don't know what that will be. But boy, that one, when he gave it to me, was so clear in my mind. It just shouted to me. Let's hope the next one does too. So for today, I'm saying be blessed.